Before we commence, I would firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also extend my respects to any elders joining us here today. My name is Kathy and I'm pleased to welcome journalist and author Ruby Hamad to discuss her book, White Tears, Brown Scars. Ruby is a Lebanese Syrian journalist and an author who was raised in Australia. Her work has appeared in Fairfax Media, The Guardian, Prospect Magazine and The New Arab. Ruby shot to international attention in 2018 when her article, How White Women Use Strategic Tears to Control Women of Colour, was published in The Guardian Australia. This article was both popular and polarising and started a conversation that some were not ready to have. From this article came Ruby's book and an opportunity to challenge stereotypes, behaviours and expectations from a new perspective. So I'd just like to welcome Ruby.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me and to everyone for joining us. I'll just a slight correction. It was how white women use strategic tears to silence women of colour on that title. But yeah, thank you again.
Thank you. So I just wanted to start by asking you, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat. But before we do, if you would mind reading just a little short excerpt, just to set the scene for everybody to know what the book is kind of about.
Sure. So I'm going to read from the opening chapter. So in that chapter, I talk a little about the article, how the article came about, and then why I decided to use it to as the basis of a book. Let me see. When I began this book, my central question was, what happens when racism and sexism collide? My answer begins with the realization that the way people regard and treat us comes down to how well we match the stereotypical features associated with our perceived gender. Because women of colour are always perceived as lesser women, then whatever the intersection, be it gender identity, sexuality, disability, class, or something else, every experience of marginalisation is made more acute when race is thrown into the mix. And it impacts our lives in ways many of us may never have considered. Women of colour who attempt to address an issue that is detrimental to them in some way almost invariably come up against a wall of white fragility, so immovable, so lacking in empathy, that the first few times it happens, you naturally assume you are imagining it, that you are the problem, that you should have gone about things differently, and you will go about things differently from now on. So you do. You adjust your reactions, you try to play nice, you watch your tone, but it keeps happening. Angry, sad, yelling, begging, it doesn't seem to matter. Until at some point, you, as a woman of colour, realise in shock that regardless of the facts of the situation, the real problem isn't even really about you. It is how white society regards you. It is how white society treats you. Because you, as a woman of colour, do not measure up to their image of what a woman is and should be in order to be believed, supported, and defended. Many white women reading this now will know exactly what I am talking about, because this very thing happens between women and men. The condescending dismissals, the exaggeratedly mystified claims of unprovoked hysteria and unhinged emotion, the gaslighting. What I and many women of colour before me, and no doubt after me, are asking is that white women open their minds when women of colour talk about the double whammy which we are dealt. That even as we agitate against the sexism of a male-dominated society, because this is also a white-dominated society, we are also assailed with racism. And often this comes from white women who turn their sanctioned victim status on us. White women can oscillate between their gender and their race, between being the oppressed and the oppressor. Women of colour are never permitted to exist outside of these constraints. We are both women and people of colour, and we are always seen and treated as such. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a beautiful reading, and it really does set the tone for the book moving forward. Now, this all started with the article in The Guardian. And we did have a question that came through from Nicole, and she's asking if you could please talk about this article that prompted the book and how you came to write it.
Yeah, so that article now is 2.5 years old, and since that article and since this book, we are seeing a lot more of this concept of quote unquote white women's tears and the friction between, or the tensions between, race and gender in feminism. But at the time, it wasn't so much spoken in the mainstream and in mainstream feminism, and certainly not in this country. And so it was quite a frightening prospect, even thinking about writing it. It's like, how will this go down? Are people going to actually see what I'm trying to say, or are they just going to recoil in horror? Like, what is she saying, that white women are never allowed to cry, that white women are always mean? So I was hoping that people could sort of see beneath that initial kind of reaction. So how the article came about it was from piecing together events in my own life. And because at that time, this kind of dynamic that I discuss, which is the ways in which often, I would say most often, when there is a conflict between a white woman and a woman of colour, it'll particularly one in which the woman of colour is challenging the white woman, or even maybe confronting her about an aggression or a perceived aggression. And the way it plays out is that the tables are turned back, and it's the brown or the black woman who's accused of being bullying, or accused of being aggressive, and of hurting the white woman, so that it becomes a conversation or a conflict about the behaviour of the woman of colour, as opposed to whatever it is that prompted the brown or the black woman to speak up in the first place. And obviously, as I look back, I see that this has happened at various times in my life, but I think I was most or particularly attuned to it at that time, about 2.5 to 3 years ago, because it happened in quick succession. And perhaps because it happened to me in a professional context. And I don't want to go into the details of that for obvious reasons, working in a sort of a public profession. That it was particularly devastating because, being feminist colleagues, I didn't expect that, right? It was kind of like, when you feel like, talk about having the rug pulled out from under you. It was like, wait, now, this is like my whole worldview. Like, my perspective is completely changed now. It's all out of kilter. And I had to try to get it back and to see what happened. And so, piecing all these different interactions with white women, some with friends and colleagues, some just online interactions, and then some offline friends. And the similarities were so stark, even though the context was different, the people were different, and the situation was different. And this isn't even about me or anyone else saying that the brown or the black woman is always right. It's not even about that. It's that we don't even get the chance to really put forward our case, right? So because it quickly, whatever the situation is, moves from what we're saying to how dare you speak to me this way, sort of. So, I was thinking about all these, and I just remember sort of scratching my head, just going, why is this happening? Like, why are these white women, why every time I say that I'm upset about something, or I try to talk to them about something that's happened to me or something they've done, it becomes about her feelings, and it becomes about her being upset with me. Like, even if she's not the one that I'm talking about with maybe like a mutual friend or a mutual colleague, it always turns away from what I'm saying to how the white woman is feeling. And it's like, this is really weird, and the people unfollowing me or unfriending me on Facebook just because of what I thought was a very minor disagreement, like very minor disagreement, no harsh words exchanged, no anger, no venom, disagreement, see you later. It's almost like there's this invisible line I crossed that I didn't know was there. And that's when, so when your eyes open up to something like that, or you're trying to answer these questions, because at that time I still thought this is kind of must be about me, if I'm the common denominator in these situations. So, your eyes open up, and then you start to see tweets, and I talk about this in the book as well, tweets from, Black and brown women in America, articles here, and you just go, oh, is this the same thing? They're talking about this, the weaponization of white women's tears, and in particular against Black people, against Black men. Is this the same dynamic, different context, but it's the same sort of foundation? Is the foundation the same, right? The roots the same. And so I brought up the topic of my Facebook page, because before I write anything, I want to make sure that it actually is widespread and solid enough to justify publishing it as an article. I'm not into the whole, I just having a thought and I'm going to blast it out. So I put it on my Facebook page, and I asked, I shared tweets from America and Canada and an article from America. And I said, I asked women in Australia, Black and brown women in Australia, if that situation had happened to them, where they've had a conflict with a white woman, and it's resulted in them losing friends or losing a job or risking a job. And the response was so immediate and so big and strong that I was like, wow, this is actually a thing. This is a thing that happens, that because of the social structure and conditioning and the environment that we're in, the social environment we're in, this is how conflicts and interactions between a white woman and a brown woman or a Black woman are going to play out. And it's not even necessarily about either of our personalities sometimes, but it's about the context, the racial, the social, political context that we live in.
Yeah, because what you see is that light bulb moment of, oh my gosh, this is a thing. This is not just me. It's not just happening to me. It's not my personality. So that would have been an amazing thing to discover. But throughout your book, what I'm discovering is that you don't just leave it as to, oh, this is a thing. It's like, why is it a thing?
Yeah.
Why is it that happens? And you do go through quite a lot of information about things like colonization, and I cannot get that word out. So, that period of time where white people were spreading out across the globe and coming to places like Australia and America. And so that formed part of the discussion about how we came to be in this position. Can you explain a little bit about that for everyone?
Sure, absolutely. So when I was putting together the book proposal, which I did again because the response to the article was so strong and global, that I actually had a lot of women, write to me or tweet me or message me asking me to essentially keep the conversation going and write a book that can actually stand as its own, like a solid book as opposed to just an article, and of course to give more context and research in it. And so it's like, oh wow, okay, I wouldn't have thought there's a book. How like so I went back and looked through the article, and I was like, okay, so what is this article really about if you're really going to get down into it? And the words that jumped out to me were the lines that I wrote about, even before we open our mouths, a brown woman or a Black woman is already positioned as a potential aggressor, right? And, and in the context being an Arab woman myself, What plays into that, of course, is terrorism. The Middle East seen as as a land of despots and harem girls and repression of women and all that. Which is not to say that that doesn't exist, but I'm just talking about what are the key stereotypes and archetypes that influence how we're perceived. So I thought, okay, so what this has to be a book about, or how you have to, like sort of the root this book is in how these stereotypes came about. How is it? Why? Why is there such a stereotype as the angry black woman? Why is there such a stereotype as the China doll, right? The submissive, the submissive, giggly, quiet China doll, who, if she stops being quiet and submissive and giggly, turns into the dragon lady. Yeah. So, how is it that Arab women are considered silent and oppressed and victimized, or we turn around and we become, the bad Arab, the aggressive, crazy, irrational Arab? So that is what I wanted to get to the heart of, because I think that is essentially what is going on, is that there is this image that we have assigned to us without even our knowledge and let alone consent, and that is what people see. So when I, as an Arab woman, if if something happens that really upsets me, or I think I've been wronged or someone else has been wronged, and I speak up, it's very unlikely that what I'm actually saying is really going to register with a lot of people, because it's that image that has been honed through Hollywood, through countless wars and interventions and literature and poetry and paintings of the Middle East. That's what people are having, like, sort of that's the lens that they're seeing me from. And so that obviously is going to taint every interaction that I have and make it very difficult for me, the person, Ruby, the actual human that exists beneath, this body and beneath all these layers of stereotypes and that have been placed on top of me. And I wanted to see how different stereotypes hold back different women of color. Now, what I wasn't expecting was how similar they'd all be. Different but similar, because they all come from the same place. And that goes back to what you were asking, Catherine, about colonialism. So when you think about it, with Europe wanting to spread out and dominate the world after, especially after seeing so much, success in the Americas, where they were able to sort of take over very quickly. And so that was accompanied by ways of talking about and representing the people that were colonizing and conquering in a way that justifies what they're doing. And so, when in the Americas and then here, a couple of centuries later, is the Indigenous people were perceived as being, and particularly women, were just perceived as being very permissive, of being, I talk about the Princess Pocahontas stereotype, that she's quite, she's like a noble savage who is very, regal and very well-spoken, but she's also very wise, and she understands that white society is superior. And so she's this mediator between her people and the white man, so that they can come together. But what come together means is complete, assimilation and annihilation, basically. And so, and what I discovered is that each race of women has a binary. Like, so you have, you're either the Princess Pocahontas, or you're what they call like the drudge, the enslaved drudge of, Indigenous drudge who's disrespected by the men and the society, the culture, and all she does is work, and she's kind of like a slave. That's how they considered them, slave to the men. So, these are the two archetypes that Native American women struggle with still to this day. And so the purpose that served regarding colonialism, well, you think about it, if the women are permissive, so if they're Princess Pocahontas, if they're a China doll, if they're a harem girl, very overly sexualized harem girl in the Middle East who uses her scarf as a tease, her veil as a tease, then you're essentially opening yourself, your body literally, and your land and your culture up to be taken over. And so that's how it was for a couple of centuries as white society, as colonialism, Western society was consolidating. And the function that served is to tell generation after generation of European that they were doing the right thing. And this representation in that sense isn't harmless. You have to consider that it's constant repetition, as I said, books, poems, paintings, and then later on films and music, just constantly repeating this image until it became more real than the real people that they were meant to be representing. But inevitably, as decolonization movements sprung up, and national liberation movements, and the colonized began to fight back, that's when the archetypes of the angry Arab, the angry Black woman, the aggressive Arab, the dragon lady, the fiery Latina, and so that's what we still sort of what we struggle with to this day. In particular, I'd say the more domineering, aggressive archetypes. So that if we do speak up or raise our voice, we really, we get pushed back down because we're considered just to be irrational. That it's not coming from a true place. It's coming just from our own inferior, irrational state.
Yeah, and I guess that it's kind of like a caricature of
Absolutely.
all of the positive, all of the aggressive kind of characteristics of one person or one race, and all the permissive characteristics, and there's no middle ground in there.
Exactly.
And there's no middle ground that.
Exactly. We're either quiet and grateful as soon as we're not, even, we're the other extreme, right? There's no middle ground for us, and that's what we struggle with. And again, to reiterate, this doesn't mean that everything we say is always going to be right, and that we're never wrong. We never are. Our anger never is misplaced. That's not what it's about. What I'm saying is that we never. It's almost a moot point, because regardless of whether we have a case or not, or a legitimate grievance or not, it's almost always going to be treated as illegitimate anyway.
Yeah. And I think when we were having a bit of a chat about this yesterday, I mentioned it's almost as if the idea is that you're totally fine, except if you say something that I don't like. And then I'm going to go, oh, you're bullying me, you're being mean to me, you're being harsh on me. Is that how you feel?
Pretty much, yeah. And the thing is, you can see how that's such an awful trap, right? Because of course one day I'm going to say something that
of course.
Something the question is, does this then become a permanent stain on my character? And is it worthy of me being completely crushed and punished? And because that's what happens. A brown woman, a Black woman will say something that someone considers to be unforgivable, and she can be just completely blacklisted. She can be ostracized, punished, and just shunned. And that's it's no way to live. And it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy, because all human beings are going to get angry about something at one point, like we just are. And second, if we are being mistreated, anyone who's mistreated consistently at some point is going to flare up about it, right? But because we're already seen in this very as caricatures with no real, nothing really going on inside, then it's just not that anger or that frustration isn't going to be perceived as legitimate or perceived as springing about from what is being done to us. It's going to be perceived as coming from that thing in place inside us that is lesser and that is inherently aggressive and irrational.
So it also is mentioned in your book that the white woman is also considered superior in terms of that they can look after children better, and it's better if children are, raised in the white kind of way. So this is very much ingrained into our society.
So in that, because I talk about archetypes about attached to white women as well, because for the these archetypes that are the negative ones that are associated with non-white women, there has to be one with attached to white women. And so that's where we get the idea of this this virtuous damsel who's very moral and very kind of representative of the goodness of white society. And part of that was in the sort of in the construction of this idea of white womanhood. Part of that was being better mothers, and that so I discuss the work of some historians, including Margaret Jacobs, who looks at the role that white women played in Australia and in the American West, in the late 1800s to early 1920s, in child removals. And in both places, they played a very key role. And so even though, particularly in Australia, it was white men who were the politicians signing off on, those policies, the physical act of taking those children was often, or even mostly, I think Jacobs argues, mostly by women, white women who for them, and this is, where the problem with feminism comes out, right? Because for them, it was a way of agitating against their own limitations, being told they shouldn't work outside the home. Motherhood is the ideal aspiration for them. So that was a way for them to kind of work outside the home in a legitimate way, because I'm going to be the great white mother. That's what Margaret Jacobs calls it, right? The great white. I'm going to take this child and raise her in the Christian way and raise her in the, a civilized way to become a useful, productive member of society. And so right away, there's that tension between Indigenous women and then all women of colour and white women, in that white women are, first of all, buying into this idea that the Western way is superior to the Indigenous way and then to the brown ways. And she's also, she is physically oppressing and, destroying lives of Indigenous women in order to agitate against the sexism of her own society and to show that she's capable of working outside the home, right? So this is that gulf. I talk about this binary that has been placed between white women and other women that has to be addressed before we can really talk about this idea of any kind of sisterhood between us all.
Yeah, and you mentioned that your source was Jacobs in that one, and we did get a question that came through from Charles about he's asking you to name a book that influenced you to write on this subject.
Right. So when I started the book, my main influence was Orientalism by Edward Said, because in Orientalism, which he talks about how the West, starting with Europe and then now America being the bigger power or the world superpower, finishing off with the US, how it has represented. Now he thought when Orientalism means everywhere that the Oriental world that is not the West. He does focus on the Middle East, right? He'd been a Palestinian himself. And so it's about representations. It's about how Arab and Muslim women, people were represented and talked about in a way that justified colonialism and war against them. And so, of course, that was a big influence, because that's how my book starts off, about how are we represented and why. why do they see us like this? What purpose does it serve? What are the consequences? What is the function of it? And so that, so he was a big influence. And then when it came to, each part of the book had sort of key references. So in the Australian context, Margaret Jacobs was one, and Aileen Moulton Robinson in Talking Up to the White Woman, when she talks about the particular dynamics between white feminists and Indigenous feminists, or Indigenous women, sorry, not Indigenous women, Indigenous women and white feminists and the issues that sprang up because, white women and white feminists will focus on their gender and not acknowledge their whiteness in that context, that they claim that feminism is for all women, but they are very much, their subject position. Her book is very academic, and it is academic, it was a PhD. And so the subject position is a white middle class woman that's not acknowledged. They consider themselves to be just women, and how that's going to fall short, because of course it's not going to meet the needs of Indigenous women. And so I use that to as a reference for that section, and also to extrapolate from that also applies to other women of color. And another great book, also academic. See, a lot of the thing with this book that I did is I try to bridge the gap between the academy and the mainstream. And I tried, considering the book is so heavy on academic research, I tried to make it as accessible as possible. I think I did better in the US edition because I had more time to work on it and more time to really adjust the language so that it was more, conversational, more lay language. And so the other, another key book was The Biopolitics of Feeling by Carla Schiller, which you can tell from the title is very much academic. And so that book is about the construction of race and sex in the 19th century by American or US scientific racists. And how womanhood was constructed, white womanhood was constructed in a certain way that it is the prototype, the epitome of womanhood. And so anyone who's not that is not only, to the scientific racists, not only considered lesser, but isn't really considered a woman at all. We're something else, right? Something more animalistic and yeah.
So you've put like a stack of research in, and I'm very conscious that there are people who are wanting to ask questions. Sure. So I did have one more that came through on the booking sheet. So before I open it up to everybody else, Charisma wrote, while it's easier to recognise overt racism from strangers, it's another matter to tackle repeated microaggressions from friends and family. Where might one draw the line between being their teacher and taking care of your own mental health?
That's a great question, because that's something I say to people. You have to weigh up each situation on its merit. Like, I'd love to say, okay, now that this book exists and people are rereading Aileen Moulton Robinson's book, which didn't receive the attention it deserved 20 years ago, and other texts, and there's this big sort of flurry of interest in anti-racism this year because of Black Lives Matter, that if you stand up for yourself, no, it's going to work out for you. I wouldn't want to put people in that position, because it may necessarily may not. So it's a matter of weighing up each situation on its merits and think about what will I gain from speaking out here or putting my foot down, and what can I stand to lose? And that is something that's going to vary from context to context. But I will say, if it's a work situation and it keeps happening, then if it's possible, maybe not so feasible in this current environment, just think about maybe looking elsewhere if that is a possibility. If it's a friend situation, is it really a friend? If someone is making you always feel this way, that, and kind of gets to a point that sometimes we're too you know, plausible deniability is a killer because sometimes people can hide behind that, and they can be, you know, their intent or their underlying meaning can be quite malicious, or quite, not even necessarily malicious, but it can be quite negative or cruel, but they hide it behind this facade of ignorance or sweetness. And so with that, I would say, knowing when to walk away from something doesn't even necessarily have to be a big dramatic exit, but knowing when to walk away is a very a powerful thing. And you know, it's important to, you don't have to speak up all the time, because it's that can just get very draining for you, and it's not going to necessarily have the outcome you want anyway. And so, you know, each situation, judge it on its merits.
Wise words.
Thank you.
Because there is one more question from me. There is a section of the book which is right at the start, when you've lodged that article and you are putting it out there into the world. And there's a section there where you just go, oh my God, what have I done? And so you became very fearful of it. Is that kind of along the lines of, oh, have I stepped too far? You know, how did you feel in that situation?
Well, the backlash was so immediate. You know, once it got put, it was coming from the UK mostly. Once the UK Guardian put it up, it was, you know, this backlash. I think it was Jordan Peterson or one of those big, you know, accounts mocked it. So of course that kind of blew it up, and I had all this coming at me. And at that point, didn't really have anyone defending it yet. So all I had was this barrage of anger and hatred and threats. Oh, better watch where you're going and look behind your shoulder, because we know what you look like and where you are, but you don't know who we are. Yeah, I mean, and you know, a threat, but you're still like, you know, and so I was like, by this time, you know, things always seem worse at night, right? You know, all your problems are magnified. So it was like almost midnight. I still remember it clearly, and I was like, exactly as you said, what have I done? Like, they're not going to understand what I'm trying to say. They're going to look at that headline. They're going to look at, you know, they're just going to say that I'm bullying white women, or I hate white women, or you know, and they're not going to sort of really look at what the article is really saying, which is, please think about how you're treating us, because you take our words as being angry and irrational when we're actually telling you that we're hurting. You're not listening to us. So of course, it just gave me more of that, right? It's just like, right, okay. So it's like, it's pointless. Like, this is not, you know, I'm just it's going to be completely misinterpreted and misrepresented, and it's going to follow me everywhere. I'm never going to be allowed to come back from it. So I was like, should I ask the Guardian to take it down? And then I just thought, no, because you do that, that's like an admission of guilt, right? That's like saying, oh, this is so shameful, we have to remove it. But the Guardian since told me they wouldn't have taken it down anyway. So, but still, so all this stuff was going through my head at midnight. I did deactivate my Twitter because it was just so overwhelming. But then I kind of, no, this is not on. I'm not, the article is not what they are saying it is. I'm not what they are saying I am. I can't back down from this. So I did go back on Twitter, and that's very fortunate I did, because at that point, the US editors had put it on their front page of The Guardian, and that is when the support really started to come in. People were like, yeah. So because it resonated, right? So I had, you know, Black and brown women here, Latino women, African American women, Canadian women, Indigenous, Native American and Indigenous women in Canada, messaging and tweeting me on Twitter, saying, "You've really put it out there." I wasn't saying things that hadn't necessarily said before, but I think it was where it was, because it was in The Guardian, which is such a, it's global, and it's a stalwart of liberal Western liberalism, And also it was so focused on white women and women of color. And so I think that's what really helped it to explode. And I think a lot of the support that was incoming was based on that, and also based on they saw that I was just getting so
They
slammed.
got it. Yeah.
They thought I was getting so slammed that they were giving me that support so that I didn't feel alone, because I was feeling very alone.
But you did your research. You knew that that was out there. You knew that those people were out there. It's just a matter of tapping in.
Yeah. Well, look, I wasn't expecting it to go global. That's the thing, right? I know, it is The Guardian and it has its international arms, but not everything that's written in the Australian Guardian goes to the US and UK and vice versa, right? So I wasn't expecting that to happen. So I was expecting it to stay here, and I was expecting it to be a mostly feminist and progressive audience. And I wasn't expecting there to be such a oh my God, what's she talking about white women's tears? That's not a thing. Because I thought, I'm writing for a feminist audience. They're going to understand that when I say white tears, it's like how, when feminists talk about male tears, right? We're not really saying that, or they're not really saying that men never are genuinely emotional or upset, or that they don't have reason to be. And so, that very specific situation where men are upset or emotional at feminism, right? I thought, well, they're going to recognize that it's that similar dynamic, right? So because it kind of went beyond Australia and well beyond feminism, for some white people, it was the first time they'd heard of this concept of white tears. So they were just like, what is she saying? White women are never allowed to cry. It's just like, no.
Yeah. And I think it's more about understanding and rather than just defending your position. It's more about taking the time to really truly listen to what the words are being spoken.
It's really saying.
Hi, so it's Isabel. Thanks, Ruby, for taking the time to talk to us today. I haven't read your book, and I'm not denying everything that you're saying, and I understand, and I know that it's happening. I mean, myself, I'm a woman, and I'm white. I don't come from an Anglo-Saxon background, of course, with my accent. I come from France. But whereas I do not deny what you're saying that is happening, and racism and sexism and also difference, people treating everybody's difference is happening in the world. My question to you is that, and you were talking just now about how your article was received in England specifically, and how you got threat and all that. So aren't you, what did you think about the fact that what you're putting out there and how you talk, and for example, as you've been talking in the last 45 minutes, could have a negative impact on the cause of feminism? Because when I haven't read your book, and I haven't read even that article, I only read pieces of it and stuff, but it seems to me that my first thought was, oh, well, you are dividing, it seems like it's a promotion to divide women. And I know that's not your intention, but it could be perceived like that. And it seems like it was perceived like that for some people. And by dividing women, I think that that's been one of the issues for hundreds and hundreds of years for women, is that instead of gathering together for the same cause and support each other, women are always trying to divide each other. And we also
read the book.
It's okay. I'll handle it. What you say that we're not joining together for the same cause, but what's a cause that we're joining together?
Well, for me, once again, I haven't read everything, and it seems like that's not what you're trying to portray, but that's how it could be perceived, by saying that there's a difference, and there is, of course, difference between people, but by really highlighting that, or there's a big difference between white women and women of colors. My fear is that we are once again trying to create a division between women, whereas we should be.
I understand what you're saying. So what I'm saying, and what my book says, is that that division is actually already there, and we're not addressing it. And because we're not addressing it, we can't have a united feminist movement, because every time that a brown woman or a black woman speaks up, then she becomes subjected to the dynamics that I talk about in the book. And now what I hear now is when white women say to me, "You're dividing us," what I hear is that you want me and other women like me, or other women of color who are not even necessarily like me, you want us to work with you, but only in a way that benefits you. Because as soon as we start to say, what about us, then you say that we're dividing you. Now my book, and for the people in the US and the UK, that's the cover, so it is a different cover. I'm trying to tell you in the book the history of how we all got here. And I'm also trying to point out that this is happening to us. It's happening, to Arab women. It's happening to Indigenous women. It's happening to Black women. It's in African women and Asian women. It's not like I just woke up one day and said and thought, you know what? I just want to start dragging white women for no reason because I just feel like dividing the sisterhood. I'm talking from a position of, for years, this was happening to me and I didn't speak up about it. I thought if I just worked harder and put my head down, then I would start to get rewarded, or I would start to get taken seriously. But I didn't. And it got to the point where it was so bad that I had to speak up. And now I want you to think about, we just talked about how much this resonated with women of color across the globe. What does that tell you? I'm really actually really genuinely pleading with you to consider the fact that so many women from different backgrounds, as I explained, Latina women, Native American women, Indigenous women here, Asian women, South Asian women, all African American women wrote to me, shared my article, wrote to me and said, "Thank you for putting this out there. We know this happens," and now they can't ignore it like they always do. Does that sound to you like I'm trying to divide, or does it sound to you like I'm trying to heal something that's broken? Because we're all suffering. White women are suffering too in a different way. Like so I'm trying to say that there are these fractures that exist, and we paper them up with Band-Aids. We don't heal them. Rip that Band-Aid off, look at the wound, listen to us, and try. I'm not saying that every single brown or black woman is always going to be right, or is always going to be honest, or is always going to come from a good place. But use your own intuition and your intelligence. I know you have it, and your humanity, and try to discern when someone is being honest and sincere with you. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time, though. You sat here for 45 minutes and listened, so that's something. It's up to you now what you do with that.
And I'm just going to move on to the next question because we do have some more coming through.
Hi, Ruby. I just want to take this time to say thank you so much for writing something so beautiful and something that I can actually relate to. It's been a long time. And I mean, I graduated from college back last year, and I have never read anything like this that I could relate to. And there has been times where I read a certain page and I had to literally reflect on it and take some time to, and there was some times where I cried thinking about certain instances that has happened to me. So my question is, I know it was more of a kind of a spiritual awakening to me to realize what was happening to me more. So I think after college or during my last years of college. And oh, by the way, I'm from Oregon, and in America. And I am going to be at the Third Eye book club meeting. Yeah, so I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, me too.
Anyways, so my question is, since Oregon is very white, I never really had, I guess, anyone that I could relate to. And so my question is, I know you don't really talk about kind of your upbringing and how if you had faced bullying or racism when you were a child, or what was the point that kind of, that when you had your spiritual awakening and realized what was happening to you?
You know, there's been different moments, like it's been this sort of cumulative effect. So yeah, I was bullied in school, and all through school, right up until sort of, you know, they finally came around in year 12, which was kind of nice, I guess. So I had 1 year where I wasn't being made fun of and abused, you know, almost daily. But anyway, so I try not to talk too much about. Look, I mean, I have written personal things. I didn't want to do it. I did it at certain points in this book because I wanted this book to be more, you know, grounded in history and sociology research with, you know, garnishes of personal stories. And I wanted to focus more on other people's personal stories. And so I, you know, I certainly wasn't thinking like this as a younger person. I'd say like my feminist sort of awakening came in that it went right not until my early 30s. Right, I've only been writing professionally since my early 30s, and I remember that clearly because this is before social media really took off, and I was in a blogging community, and you know, I joined it because I wanted to. I was thinking about starting to write and send things into editors, so I wanted to kind of practice writing blogs and stuff, and I was so shocked at how women, some of us women, the progressive women in particular, were being treated by some of the men. There was just like this real dismissal and this real mockery, and you know, and I was just like, wow, like I'm really I'm amazed at how blatant and it is, right? So that's when, you know, because at that point I was like, you know, having grown up in a strict background, you know, my parents being Arab and Muslim, and it was quite a, you know, I had a very, very sheltered upbringing. So in my mind, you know, women were completely free, you know, not really. So that's how that happened. You know, my 20s were really just almost like this sort of blur of traveling and partying. So I don't really talk about my 20s much. It was kind of like this extreme reaction to my teenage years. So my early 30s, late 20s is when I started to settle down. And so that's when I became really more attuned to feminism. And then I'm sorry, you know, to say it's from working in the media that I really became more and more attuned to how racism affects me and other women like me at every level. And not just in, you know, we know about, you know, the big issues and with racism, but even we're in places that we don't expect it. And that's kind of what this book tries to get into.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to that. So we were just talking about the Third Eye is a fundraiser for a Black-owned bookstore who they opened the first Black-owned bookstore in Portland, Oregon last year, and then they had to close because of COVID. So they had to close their shop front. They're operating only online. So I'm doing a fundraiser. It's open for people across the world, actually. So I'm doing a fundraiser with them so they can raise money to get a new shop front.
Zamora, she's written something in the chat. She's saying, thank you so much for your work in understanding women of colour and allowing women of colour a chance to be understood and heal.
Thank you so much.
It's a difficult concept for me because I hadn't even read this book before, and I finished it last night. And so I have actually read the book, and I'm actually taking the time to process it. And I think that processing is a very important part of understanding what's going on. So we're probably just about out of time. I know Ruby's got a very, very busy schedule. She's got PhD deadlines and all sorts of things going on. But I would just like to say thank you so much. And if anybody is interested in borrowing the book, I will return my copy to the library, but we do have a few copies in the library. So obviously things at the moment, we have a quarantine system because there's plastic on the books. So we have to quarantine them for like 3 days to a week before we put them back out onto the shelves for people. So that's just part of our COVID safety plan, but I will return it. I have read it and I'm still amazed at some of the concepts in here that I just hadn't even thought of. And it does come from a very academic, historical, thoughtful argument and discussion. And I think it's about opening up that discussion, which is hopefully what we've managed to do today. And I like the acknowledgements page. So if you're happy, I'm just going to read the acknowledgement. It's just the last little chapter. Actually, there was another page. Let me just find it. 108. So one of my questions was for you, which has actually been read out, which has actually been answered in your book. As I was reading and thinking about it, one of the questions was, what do you hope readers would take from this book? But the page which I wanted to read, which is, it's only one sentence, so I'm just going to read it. So what you say that you want people to get out of it is I'm doing my bit to ensure as many women of colour as possible don't get crushed, is the purpose of this book. So, and I think that says your purpose, and it's your book and it's your story. And thank you for sharing it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. And we appreciate you taking the time and listening. And yeah, feel free to borrow the book, or if you wish to purchase a copy for yourself or for someone else, please just remember to think about independent booksellers here on the Central Coast, if you're on the coast, or wherever you may be. So very big thank you.
Thank you all so much. It's been really great. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us from across the world even. That's incredible. Really appreciate it.